Hey, what's up, guys? So, there's been a lot of talk recently about why Brexit could end up without a deal. Um, Basically, they're saying that Parliament is too divided and we will run out of time, or Theresa May could walk away, or there could be a way in which we end up without a deal. And the consequences of that, they say, economically, could be quite catastrophic. But today I'm here to talk about the consequences of a no deal and why we might be ending up without a deal in the first place. Let me take you through the makeup of Parliament as it sits. So we have the Conservatives. They're on 316 seats in Parliament. They're the people that led the EU referendum. David Cameron was the one that enabled it. So half the party kind of thinks that Brexit is the best thing in the world, and another piece of it feels that Brexit is a disaster for the economy. But they're mainly led by this woman, Theresa May, who's our Prime Minister at the moment, and she's the one who has recently made a Chequers white paper. She triggered Article 50. She's already negotiated the first divorce bill of the negotiations. We're now onto the trade bill, as it were, and we've now got this Chequers plan. Labour, on the other hand, make up 258 seats. They are the party that wants access to the customs union and single market, whereas Theresa May wants out of the single market and customs union, but she wants to negotiate a free trade area. So Labour are a little bit more mixed and a bit more hard to decipher what they are on Brexit. Basically, this guy, Jeremy Corbyn, during the campaign, we all thought he was in favour of leaving the European Union. He said since that he has voted to remain, but he will support leaving because that's what the British people voted, and a lot of their seats have leave majorities in them, and of course the Labour Party are a mainly Remain party, so it comes in a lot of contention for them. They have voted against the government on a lot of occasions as a result of them believing in Remain, but they are supposedly in favour of Brexit as a result of their constituencies being majority Leave. So, because the Conservatives did not have a majority in Parliament, we have a hung Parliament, and so they had to go in coalition with the DUP. Now, the DUP are a Northern Irish party. They're focused on Northern Irish issues, particularly within this government relating to Brexit. And they don't want a hard border between them and the Southern Ireland because it would bring up the Troubles again. And then we have the SNP. Now, Scotland voted mainly for Remain in the referendum, and they make up 35 MPs after they lost after the last general election in 2017. They lost some seats as the Tories gained some in Scotland. But nevertheless, they're still the Scottish National Party. They're still thinking with the intention of eventually leaving the UK, and therefore everything that they do is done with that in mind, and they also want to be part of the European Union. They feel that Scotland voted to remain part of the UK as part of it being part of the European Union, and because it's now leaving the European Union, they deserve a second referendum on Scottish independence. And then we have the Lib Dems. The Lib Dems want to have a second referendum on the final deal of Brexit. They gained a few seats in the last general election, but not enough, so the leader resigned. We now have Vince Cable as the Lib Dem leader. Then we have Sinn Féin, who don't take their seats, again another Northern Irish party. And then we have the others, the Greens, Plaid Cymru, and Independents, and the Speaker. So let's break down the Conservative Party and how they are divided on Brexit and what the numbers are in terms of where those divisions lies. So at the top end of the Conservatives, you have the May loyalists and the pragmatists. These are the people who support Theresa May no matter what. So if there's a bill in Parliament, they will vote with the government. These people obviously agree with the Chequers deal. they agree with the way things are going, and they feel that stability and the way having Theresa May in power is a better option than having a leadership election at this point. But then you have the hardline Brexiteers, led by Jacob Rees-Mogg. These are the people that basically want to leave the European Union at all costs, and they feel that Theresa May isn't doing a good enough job. So they're holding Theresa May to account on all Brexit issues. They don't like the Chequers plan, and they feel that they will vote against it and amend it and change it as much as possible to make sure that we are fully out of the European Union as much as possibly can go. And the hardline Remainers. These are the people that completely regret the EU referendum at all. They make up a smaller number than the others, mainly because they don't want to be seen as defying the will of the people, but they are nonetheless part of the Tory party. The Labour Party makes up 258 seats in total. So most of the Labour Party are kind of soft Brexiteers. They want access to the customs union and single market. They don't want to annoy EU citizens' rights, and they see immigration as a good thing in certain areas such as the NHS. So they don't want to upset that balance. But in the last bill there were 4 pro-Brexit Labour rebels. And then we have the others. So the SNP, obviously I've said before, they agree with Scotland being in the European Union because it voted for that in the referendum in their view. So they are pro-Remain. They make 35. And then we have 12 pro-Remain Liberal Democrats who won that second vote. Got the 10 pro-Leave DUP who were in the coalition with the government. And then the others who are mainly Remain. So we the Greens, the Plaid Cymru and Independents. And then Sinn Féin who don't take their seats in Parliament. So if we look at this in terms of numbers, then we've got Theresa May and her loyalists at 180. Jacob Rees-Mogg, Boris Johnson, David Davis, or the Brexiteers, they make up about 80. The Remainers, Anna Soubry, Kenneth Clarke, those people make up about 15. And the DUP make up 10. So that is the governing parties. I say parties because it really is a coalition of coalitions right now of the government that are in charge. In the opposition, we have the 254 Corbyn, I'd say Corbyn loyalists, but originally they didn't agree with Corbyn being in power until after the 2017 election in which he gained seats. Therefore, he's become a stronger candidate for Prime Minister, for party leader in general than Theresa May, who lost seats in the last 2017 election. And then we have the 4 pro-Brexit Labour rebels. And we've got 35 SNP, 10 Lib Dems, and 12 others. So I've now coloured these. So yellow means completely Remain, blue means completely in favour of leaving, and green is sort of in between, pragmatist kind of. So if I put these together and add up the numbers, we can work out what the numbers are within Parliament and what kind of Brexit we're therefore going to get as a result. So we have 434, roughly, soft Brexiteers, but, here's the big but, 254 of which, on the Labour side, are anti-government. Then you have 72 hardline Remainers. These are the SNP, the Lib Dems, the Remainers of the Conservatives, the Greens, and Plaid Cymru. And then you've got 94 hardline Brexiteers, Conservatives, a bit of Labour, and the DUP. So let's have a look at those as 3 completely new parties of coalitions within Parliament. Cross-party alliances is what they're called. So we have the pragmatist, 434. But I've put this line down the middle to represent the difference between the Labour side of it and the Conservative side of it. We have the Brexiteers, 94. And then we have the Remainers, 72. So the pragmatists are still the biggest party, as it were, in Parliament, but they are divided, and The Brexiteers are pushing a lot of the pragmatists, and the Remainers as well, pushing a lot of the pragmatists in two very, very separate directions. So let's have a look at the pragmatists themselves. Who are they? What do they want? So they want to ensure economic and political stability. They don't want a Brexit that threatens the economy of the UK, and they don't want to necessarily rip up the current economic status and create uncertainty. They want as much certainty and as much economic stability as possible. They want to access the single market and customs union. So both parties want access to the existing single market and customs union of the European Union. So that means that they don't want to leave them completely, but they don't want to be in them completely either. They sort of want to create this new trade deal in which we have part in, part out, essentially. They want to end free movement of people, so they believe that the EU referendum was largely made on immigration, and therefore by ending free movement of people, that's the free crossing of people from Europe to the UK or the UK and back. That would therefore give people the idea that the government was therefore in control of immigration. And these people think that we must strike a deal. They will do anything to try and strike that deal, and I feel that they're too afraid to walk away without a no deal, because of the economic consequences and the instability that might cause politically and economically. So what have the pragmatists actually done for the purposes of a stable, pragmatic Brexit? So they triggered Article 50 back in early 2017, I think it was. Theresa May wrote a letter to the European Union starting the process of Brexit negotiations, which means we have 2 years from that point to get a deal with the European Union. So she then made the Great Repeal Bill, which repeals all the EU law and puts it into UK law. It's now called the European Withdrawal Bill, and it's now still being debated in Parliament. We've also got other bills and arrangements already made. So last year they ensured EU citizens' rights living in the UK and UK citizens' rights living in the EU. So it means that our rights are protected and their rights are protected living here. As a result of the divorce bill negotiations, she's offered to pay up £40 billion as part of that divorce bill in existing payments that we would have made in the years of negotiating and the transition period. And she's agreed that transition period to ensure that economic stability so that we don't suddenly have to switch from one place to another in terms of the way border businesses are run, for example. And we have the Chequers Plan, which offers a free trade area. That is still being debated in Parliament. We don't quite know what this free trade area would entail once negotiations have completed, but she basically wanted to make an area in which we could negotiate freely with the European Union. It would be similar to the customs union single market, but it would be our own thing, essentially. The Brexiteer, what do they want? So they want to be out of the EU altogether. They want to be out of the customs union and single market. They don't want the EU controlling their laws. They don't want anything to do with what we've already taken from the EU. Because they believe that the UK can thrive on its own on WTO rules. That's World Trade Organization rules, the way other countries outside of the EU and outside of being near the EU thrive. They want to get immigration down to tens of thousands. So it's promised by Theresa May that she would try and get immigration down to tens of thousands. That includes immigration, emigration, and net migration. So it currently sits that the people coming into the country, immigration, is a lot higher than the people going out of the country, emigration. and therefore they want to get that figure is called net migration, and they want to get that down to, it's currently sitting above 200,000, and they want to get that down, way down to tens of thousands, because they don't feel that the current sitting government, the pragmatists, are going to do that post-Brexit anyway, because they're threatening things like the NHS needs immigrants, certain businesses need immigrants, and therefore the pragmatists want to let people in based on what skill sets are needed economically within the country. But the Brexiteers are saying, no, immigration has to come down to tens of thousands as you promised. And they will trigger a no deal if they have to. So they're willing to block Brexit multiple times, making amendments until, essentially wasting Theresa May's time just to get that no deal. Not because they want to get a no deal, because economically it would create a lot of instability, and politically it's a lot of headache in terms of what you do for kind of tariffs and border security, particularly in Northern Ireland, and airspace, things like that. But if it means that we get out of the single market customs union, we get out of European jurisdiction, then they will trigger a no deal, or try and get a no deal, because to them a no deal is better than a bad deal, as was said during the early stages of the negotiations by Theresa May. So what have the Brexiteers done? So they resigned and weakened Theresa May. So recently David Davis and Boris Johnson resigned from the cabinet, weakening Theresa May's position and making the Chequers deal seem a lot less substantial than it would have been had they stayed. So last year they protested against the fisheries bill. Jacob Rees-Mogg, Nigel Farage, I think even Boris Johnson. Distinctly remember they got on a ship and they just in the Thames, and then I think they dumped a load of fish in the Thames as a protest against Theresa May. So they made 4 amendments to the European Withdrawal Bill recently, and those 4 amendments were getting out of collecting EU tariffs. They ruled out an Irish sea border that would have been particularly fought by the DUP, who don't want to see a different deal for Northern Ireland than the rest of the UK gets. And they got out of EU VAT regimes. And last year, the DUP stopped the divorce negotiations altogether just before Christmas. If you remember, it delayed it an extra week than it would have done. But it was only a week, I would say. The Remainers. The Remainers want to make the country rethink Brexit. They think Brexit is the worst idea possible. So they want to be in the single market and customs union because they feel like the economic shock of suddenly being out of those things and the lack of trade opportunities that are available to us out of the single market and customs union is significantly reduced. And certain Remainers, such as Tony Blair, have said that it doesn't matter what, the UK will be worse off outside of the EU than in it. The Lib Dems, and again those ex-PMs, want to hold a referendum on the final deal. In particular, they want to ask the UK public, do they want to go ahead with this deal, or do they want to back out Brexit altogether? And they want to have as many fail-safes as they can make. So if they can somehow defaultly be in the customs union, or be in the single market, or ensure EU citizens' rights, or make sure that the NHS gets enough doctors and nurses that it needs automatically, or make sure that the Irish border stays the same as much as possible, they will try and fight for as many economic and political fail-safes as they can. So what have the Remainers done? So they sent the Brexit bill back and forth from the House of Lords and the House of Commons multiple times, making multiple amendments, slowing things down a bit, just making things take longer to pass through Parliament than would otherwise do, and therefore it means that Theresa May therefore can't go back to the EU and say, this is our plan, this is our deal, because our parliamentary process takes so long. So they've asked for a second referendum a lot of times. The Lib Dems tried to make an amendment in the House of Lords. They failed to get that through Parliament, but they're still asking. So they started a campaign recently, I don't know if you saw, with big names, celebrities, ex-prime ministers, Tony Blair, John Major, and big cross-party alliance Remainers. I tried to make sure that we remain in the customs union in the event of a no deal, but failed. So recently they made an amendment in which they tried to ensure that in the event of a no deal, we would automatically stay within a customs union, and they failed to actually get that through Parliament, because that would therefore weaken Theresa May's negotiating position, because she couldn't then say, we're walking away from it all. She could only say, we're walking away from it all except a customs union deal. And it also wouldn't have been logical, because there's no way the EU would allow us to have access to one thing and not anything else. So here's why I think, after all that we're not going to get a deal anyway. Time. We only have 13 weeks between the time I'm making this video and the time in which we're supposed to leave the European Union. So we're supposed to leave on March 2019. We do have a transition period that continues for 2 years after that, in which we can kind of finalise and work out the kind of broader things. I think that might end up being a lot more work than we expect, and we might end up doing a lot more work in that period as to what kind of deal we're going to get in that transition period than we do before March 2019 anyway. But officially, Article 50 is supposed to take only 2 years. For some reason, they've got a time limit of 2 years on it. And if you want to extend that period, you have to ask the EU and all the nations to agree that to extend the time period. I'm surprised Theresa May hasn't tried to extend that time period yet. I suspect it might be a negotiating advantage in which she says, hey, we're running out of time, we need this deal, and it's a way of kind of rushing through a better option for the UK. But I suspect that a lot of Remainers, and probably a lot of Brexiteers, will be begging her to extend that time period of March 2019. So it's likely, it's highly likely actually, that we will get a lot more Remainer and Brexiteers amending the bills that come through Parliament and blocking and amending and sending it to the Lords and amending and blocking and blocking and amending, and it will just keep going and going and going. And so that means that Theresa May won't be able to go to EU and say, this is our negotiating position. She'll say, well, this might be our negotiating position, but it's changing right now in Parliament. Hang on a minute, what have they said? Oh, they blocked that. Oh, we can't have that anymore. Sorry, I've negotiated that. Sorry, I didn't mean to negotiate that. We don't want that anymore. So it goes on like that, and eventually you can't really negotiate with that position until Parliament agrees on what they want. Then Theresa May can't really go and negotiate. So the whole process of sitting down with the EU negotiators is kind of more of a publicity stunt than it is a real thing, until we know what it is that we want on our side of the negotiations. The Irish border. So the DUP in particular don't want Northern Ireland to be very different from the rest of the UK, but they don't want a hard border between Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland. So that means no border patrols, nothing, no barriers, nothing to suggest that you need a passport or any kind of documentation to get from Southern Ireland to Northern Ireland. Why? Because of the Troubles, because there's a lot of tension in that region, and because there's a lot of businesses that rely on being able to cross freely, that have grown and worked on being able to cross freely. So you have to have a free border. But the problem is, a free border means that, one, anything you can get in the UK, and two, if we're out of free movement and we're out of the single market and customs union, then how does that work for Northern Ireland? Does that mean that Northern Ireland's are going to have to be slightly different? Does that mean we have a border in the Irish Sea? It gets very, very complicated. Because of that, because it's still complicated and we still don't know what we want, and it doesn't necessarily mean even if Theresa May gets what she wants from the Chequers plan, or the UK Parliament gets what they want, it doesn't mean the DUP are going to agree. It's very complicated, and they say that the first part of the divorce bill is 80% negotiated. That last 20% is actually the Irish border, and I don't think the Irish border is going to be negotiated in time. Number 4, the EU demanding too much. So far, the EU have been very nasty in terms of what they're asking from the UK government. In terms that we're already paying a divorce bill, which we didn't want to pay. We're already susceptible to a time limit. They're already saying that we can't have access to the customs union without being in their existing customs union or things like that. They don't want the bureaucracy of they don't want more bureaucracy when it comes to the border. There's this whole issue of if a good comes into the EU and then crosses from the EU to the UK, how does a business pay the tariff to get that good to the UK? Do they have to pay it to the EU or do they have to pay it to the UK? How is that going to work? There's the whole airspace issue. The EU are going to demand too much money and time and too much for themselves, and the UK won't get any benefits from actually leaving. It will be Brexit in name only, or how it's called, BRINO is the acronym. And the other reason why we could not get a deal, although I think it's highly unlikely, because as I've said, Theresa May is a pragmatist, and the pragmatists want to strike a deal at all costs, because having a no deal is an economic threat of uncertainty, and all the things that come with it, of problems at the border, problems getting food in and things like that. People have made all sorts of scare stories already in the papers about, say, if you went on holiday and you're in the EU and how do you get back home and things like that. But it's still an option on the table, apparently, is that in order to get full access to the single market and customs union, you can always have that threat to walk away. Now that is a threat to the EU as well as the UK. The EU, because obviously they can't get access to the benefits of the UK, and they will lose a bit economically, and it's obviously worse for the UK because we don't get any access to the EU at all. But here's the thing. There's no such thing as a no deal. Okay, I know what you're saying. There is such a thing as a no deal. We can leave the customs union and single market and go on WTO rules, and we can just walk away from the whole negotiations. But here's the thing. Here's why I don't feel like a no deal really is going to exist at all in history in the future. Number 1. Brexiteers want to be out of the single market and customs union anyway. Perhaps the idea of a no deal is just a way for us to negotiate as much or as far into the single market and customs union as we can. If otherwise we wouldn't be trying to get a deal, we would have just walked away as it was and negotiated the more bureaucratic, logistical things of how the border is sorted out and how the Irish border is sorted out. Getting access to the single market and customs union in what she called the free trade area is a way of being in them by seeming to be out of them. So a lot of what Theresa May's Chequers proposals brought up angered a lot of people because it seemed like we were basically having Brexit in name only, in which we have the jurisdiction of the EU and the single market and the customs union, things like that, but we're supposedly leaving the EU. But you can't supposedly leave the EU if you're within the things that come as part of being in the EU. So the government say that they're making contingency plans in the event of a no deal. That means that if, in the event of a no deal, they supposedly have a plan to increase border forces, to ensure there is a way to get goods into the country, to ensure there is a way to cross the Irish border. They should be, or they say they're making, contingency plans in the event of not negotiating with the EU. This is another thing, they already have the divorce bill 80% negotiated. So whether or not we get any access to the customs union single market, any access to stopping free movement of people, or anything like that, we already have that divorce bill 80% negotiated. So we're already protecting the EU citizens' rights. We're already paying £40 billion and having a transition period, supposedly. We're already making steps for the air travel and the fisheries and the agriculture and things like that. It's in both parties' interest to not go completely without a deal in some areas. And as I've said before, there are bureaucratic things that come as part of having Brexit. The EU doesn't want that. The UK doesn't want the logistical nightmare of having to deal with a no deal. So the idea that a no deal would be some kind of disastrous, horrible thing, is a fallacy, because a no deal basically means that we're going to be ending the negotiations with the EU. So any attempt to enforce the Chequers plan will end, which means there might be bits of it that we try and renegotiate or try and logistically sort out, but I genuinely don't believe that we're going to completely leave every logistical thing that comes with being in the EU as opposed to being without the EU. But that's just my opinion. Let me know your opinion in the comments below, and subscribe.